It is spooky time, and I have a compilation of scary Halloween special stories for you. Also, a big thanks for the continued support on Mr. Scare. We are growing at a steady pace, and the 2,000 subscribers milestone isn't far away. Now I'll start reading the stories, and meanwhile, make sure that you have subscribed to the channel and given a thumbs up to this video. Back in high school, around the end of my junior year I believe, it became popular to go on these adventurous endeavors to these so-called haunted places. Literally, a group of about 30 of us would carpool to some abandoned house one weekend, or to some secluded forest the next, spending the days at school in between, searching for more places like this in the area. Anyhow, we had this cavalier nature about us when it came to potential hauntings. At some point, a friend of mine who was several years older than me told me about how he and his friends would do similar things back when they were young. His childhood home backed up to a huge farm, and he and his friends would spend their days fishing or hanging out on this farm. So they were quite familiar with the farm. The owner, apparently a very religious man, maybe a priest or a pastor, had owned the farm and a small house on the property. The story went that the owner had been locked up for murder and died in prison, leaving the farm to whomever, and it wasn't kept up. However, upon hearing the news of this man's demise, my friend told me that he and his friends had decided to go into this house. I guess the windows had been busted out, and they opened a door and walked in. He described them fooling around and trying to scare one another. But he had decided to walk up the stairs, and upon his reaching the second floor, he saw a coffin in the main, open room. The way he had explained it to me was that he didn't know what it was immediately, and sort of sauntered over to check it out, only to have the sudden flash of realization that this was a coffin. That too in an abandoned house. I suppose he and his friends made a quick retreat from the house. Of course, the way that he told this part of the story was much better, peppering in more details about the man who owned the property, which gave the story that mythical and supernatural sort of feel. I remember being frightened by his delivery and sincerity, though it is quite likely he had rehearsed it before for occasions like that. This story had taken place 15 years or so previous to him telling me. I told one of my adventurous cohorts the story, and we thought it would be a good idea to investigate it. I knew where this person had lived, so we assumed we could simply walk behind his house, find the farm, and then find the house. We had a grand plan to bring the whole group out on the weekend, but we weren't sure if we were being strung on a lie, or if this place was still there if it were true. Anyhow, one weekday after our football practice, he and I drove out to the street my friend lived on. There was definitely a farm behind his and his entire street's homes. We decided to go ahead and sneak through someone's yard and onto the farm to see if the house was there. Once we made it through the manicured, suburban yard and through the brush separating the farm, we were knee-deep in an overgrown field. We sort of hacked our way through a bit, and sure enough, as we made it to the edge of a hill, the house was only 100 or so yards away from us. We had made it that far, so we decided to go in and investigate. As we approached this house, there was a huge, black bird perched on its roof. Once we were within 20 feet of the house, the bird flew away from the house and perched upon a tree adjacent to the house. Being a bit nervous, we began questioning why the bird had made such an odd move, but thought better of making a big deal about it. Now, this house is the prototypical haunted house. It had that quaint, historic look to it, with the broken windows, eerie shadows, and sort of ominous stature one associates with a haunted house. There was even a grave marker in the front yard. So again, we were increasingly nervous as we approached this house. The door was jammed shut, but the window had been completely removed, so we played rock, paper, scissors for who would climb through first. I had the luxury of going in second, but did so quickly as being on the porch by myself was just as unsettling. The inside of the house had literally not been touched. Besides weather damage, most everything was intact. There were pictures and decorations still up, with a bit of furniture remaining. We eventually became comfortable with being inside and began to snoop around. Of course, we were fearful of trekking upstairs, afraid to find something we didn't want to find. Alas, we squeamishly crept up the stairs only to find an empty space. At this point, we became at ease with walking around the house, laughing off the so-called ghost story mystique. As we looked through the main floor again, I noticed that there was a tiny door in the kitchen. It was about knee-high. Undauntedly, we flung it open only to reveal a dark, stone stairwell that a person would literally have to crawl down. Its presence alone was terrifying, for some reason, but it had a landing about halfway down, with the stairs turning in a different direction and out of our sight. However, perched on the landing, and partly concealed by the walls to the other part of the stairwell, was a large rectangular wooden box. Yes, it was a coffin. And it was staring right back at us. And I am not saying figuratively, because it gave a vibe that it was watching us. Also, as per my friend who narrated the story, the coffin was not where it was supposed to be. And if someone moved it, why? But there were no footprints on the floor, or any signs of presence inside the dust-ridden home. So it could not have been a human. And if it was not a human, then how the hell did the heavy coffin move on its own? As all these thoughts rushed through my head, a sudden snap made us jump. Not sure where it came from, but it sounded like wood snapping. Was it from inside? I am not sure. It could have been a mouse or something, but we did not think anything logical. We darted to the window. Now, my friend and I weren't exactly small people, so I would imagine the sight of us pale-faced, with a cartoonish hair-on-neck shocked expression, trying to both squeeze out of a window at the same time, would have been quite comical. We did hear something behind us as we made our way outside. But again, it could have been something we imagined. I really hope so. There were no rotting smells inside or around the coffin as well. But the vibe was eerie. We did not think much and kept running. Visualize the both of us in a dead sprint, heading away from this house through waist-high weeds. I still laugh thinking about both of us running like that. Anyhow, we turned to look back about halfway to the end of the farm just in time to see that massive blackbird fly back from the tree and onto the house. We probably made double time from that point on. In hindsight, the whole thing was a bit odd. Especially the behavior of the bird. My friend and I attributed it to some sort of supernatural power. So at the very least, we had a better reason to run like children. When I was somewhat about 6 or 7 years old, my family decided to go on summer vacation. We decided to go up to a little island in Maine. We rented out this old house on the water. From what I can remember, there were about 6 or 7 other houses on the island. Everyone else who lived there was in their 60s, except for this mid-40s gentleman who fished on the water. His name was Bubba. Anyway, the island was exceedingly creepy. Everything about the house was really old. Every piece of furniture from that house was probably over 60 years old. Not to mention that there was no television. The running water was used through a well and pump, and hundreds of books and pictures in the house, dated through at least the last 100 years. To make things more pants-shittingly creepy, there was an infestation of rats in the backyard that would run around at night time when we tried to sleep. Also, whenever we made dinner, all of the old ladies who lived in the houses on the island somehow knew, and would show up and give us blueberry pie and freshly caught bluefish. It was really creepy. It was as if everyone knew what we were doing, and when we were doing it. Long story short, a few nights into our stay at this house, my parents started hearing singing at night. They said that it would start and stop for about 20 to 30 minutes. The first few nights they didn't think much of it. The following day, they asked around, but they couldn't find the source of the singing. On the second to last night of our week-long stay, my whole family heard the singing, and we went outside to find out what was going on. It sounded like a choir of children. It really freaked all of us out, but we didn't want it to ruin the trip. It was just very mysterious. The next day, my dad starts checking out some of the old photos and books in the library, and he finds this old scrapbook dated to the early 1920s. The house we were living in was once an old schoolhouse, and there was a picture of the boys' choir. We all shat bricks. We did not even bother to ask around for more information, and if there was an actual human boys' choir that practiced at night. We just packed up and left the next day. And a fun fact, the neighbors brought us some gifts as a farewell. I'm telling you, they knew everything about us. Either they watched us in some unimaginable way, or they could straight up read our minds. Either way, it was creepy. We never bothered to visit that town again. And just for clarity, not even once did we feel vulnerable. There was nothing hostile in that environment. They were just living or existing in harmony. Lots of creepy things happened to me growing up. My mom is a spiritualist and for a while a medium. Now being a medium is something she said you really had to train at. So things used to happen quite a lot around her. Not a lot happened to me, but one of the things I remember most was a party we were having at my house. It was late and everyone was crashing into my and my little sister's room, and we were having a big pillow fight in the dark. All of a sudden my friend stops and takes a weird gasp. Now my room was strange. It was very narrow, only having enough room to fit a bed and a table, but it was very long. At one end of the room, there were also 3 steps that led down to another smaller area. My friend was looking down at this area, and as I looked down, I could see the figure of a cloaked man standing at the top of the steps. I freaked the fuck out and banged the light on, and sure enough, no one was there. There were about 5 or 6 of us in the room, and every single person saw the same man. Whether or not it was a trick of the light is debatable, but we all slept with the light on that night. Back then we were about 12 or 13 years old. Another event I remember was an evening I spent at my friend's house. This was a different friend, and not any of the ones from the sleepover. Her parents were out for the night, so we were all up in her room, playing music and dancing like idiots. There were about 5 of us that night too. She had a big golden retriever dog. And all of a sudden, he got up out of the room and ran down the stairs and started barking. Next thing we hear what sounds like Lisa's dad literally screaming her name.
Lisa!
We all freaked out, cause her dad didn't know we were there and was going to have a complete shit fit. We whacked the music off and ran downstairs, only to find that her dog was barking at a random corner of the room. We didn't take too much notice of this at the time, but we all ran out the back door and ran a little up the street. I looked around to notice Lisa wasn't with us, and started back towards the house a bit. It was at this point, I noticed there was no car at the house, meaning there was no way her dad was back. Lisa then came running out of the house in tears, saying something had stopped her from coming out of the garden, and was constantly calling out her name. I brought her back to my house, and she stayed there until her parents came home. It wasn't until about 3 to 4 weeks later, I wanted to go over to her house, and asked if she wanted to come out since she lived in a house that was across a field from mine. I tried ringing, but got no answer, so I got my old video camera and used it to zoom in to see if anyone was in. The way her house worked was that there was the living room, then the kitchen behind it. There was a window directly behind the living room window in the kitchen so you could see straight through into the garden. I was checking this out when I noticed a figure moving in front of the light from the window and blocking it. I thought that she must be in, but with closer inspection, I noticed that the figure was someone I had never seen before, and they were staring right at me from across the field with my camera. I freaked out, and then I called my sister in to have a look, but when I came back in, it was gone. We were there another few minutes when a car pulled up, and Lisa and her whole family got out and brought some shopping into the house. I told her about it much later, and she confessed she saw things all the time in that house. Needless to say, I stopped staying as much. Another event was with my brother. He'll never admit it, but he's very receptive to otherworldly kinds of things. The story I remember the most was when we lived in a 3-storied house. He had the top floor, but he also had a recliner chair in his room. He started complaining that he'd see what looked like the shape of a person in his chair, but always assumed it was the way he'd thrown his clothes on the chair. One night, he decided to investigate. He got up and walked slowly over to the chair, and when he got inches away from the face of whoever was in the chair, it disappeared. I have never heard my brother scream like that in my life. Everyone on all 3 floors heard him that night. He would also see things like nooses hanging from the ceiling and similar stuff. This one is my mom's experience. My mom really got into spiritualism after her best friend died of cancer. I think it was mostly because she wanted to believe that there was something else after this life. But anyways, she spent a lot of time after her friend died, looking out for her children left behind. On this particular day, she took one of her daughters out to the zoo. Later that day, my mom came home, and she told me that she remembers sitting at her dresser table, deciding whether or not to wear a pearl necklace. She decided not to wear it, and left with her two friends to go to the spiritualist church. At the church, she was sitting in the middle of her two friends. Halfway through the service readings, she felt a big kick at her back. She turned around, but found there was no one there. She turned and asked both her friends if they had hit her, and both of them replied no. Then it happened again. She was positive it was coming from behind, but there was no one in any of the rows behind them. At this point, the reading service had finished. Now in spiritualist churches, the reader is usually a medium, and at this point, the medium will start telling people in the audience if someone has contacted them. Usually, they just say general things that are coming through to them, but on this occasion, the medium, a woman I believe, walked off her podium straight to where my mom was, and proceeded to tell her that there was a young woman sitting behind my mom, who had been kicking her, and that she was her friend. She wanted my mom to know that she was thankful that my mom was looking after her children now that she was gone, and how much she loved her. She also told her that she saw her trying on the pearl necklace, and that she should have worn it because it was beautiful. I live in a one-bedroom apartment on the corner with thick stucco walls. There are two walls to the outside with large windows. The apartment behind it is the showroom apartment, which is usually empty. And one apartment upstairs with an old gentleman, I guess. At night it is always dead quiet. I have never lived in such a quiet place ever before in my life. One night, I awaken halfway to what sounds like my door swinging open. I live alone. I am mentally very confused and trying desperately to wake up enough to get up and speak. My mind is going a million miles a minute, trying to figure out what to do, as my eyes slowly and gradually adjust to the darkness. I stay paralyzed in my covers for what felt like forever, and try to listen for any more noises. I then grabbed my media remote beside me, and started blasting music from my bookshelf speakers, in hopes of alerting them that I was there and very much awake. There is nothing to arm myself with, so I'm hoping to scare them with the threat of them getting a beating to a soundtrack, while desperately hoping I'm just imagining things. I slowly make my way around the corner, turning on the lights as I go, when I notice that 15 feet away, the entrance door into the kitchen is standing wide open. My stomach hits bottom as I'm desperately looking for places someone might be hiding. After a quick but serious search behind me, I gather the courage to slowly walk toward the entrance. I close the door and think maybe I just didn't close it all the way, and it blew open. I've never done this, and very rarely forget to bolt the door. When I look into the kitchen, I notice that the chair that I keep at the desk has been moved up against the refrigerator. And this is something that I knew I did not do at all. I mean, it did not make any sense at all. I did a hardcore search of every spot inside my apartment with every light on that I could find. It took me a while for me to convince myself nothing was missing, and that no one was still there, and somehow managed to get myself back to sleep. My stomach still drops thinking about it. I was cooking dinner a month before when I caught someone breaking into my storage closet just outside my bedroom. I now have a motion detecting night vision IP camera monitoring the rooms for me, and an IP cam app for Android. I still hate when I hear a noise at night and have flashbacks to that time.